Committee. Can you hear me all right? How about that? Is that better? Well done coming out on such a wet day. This is a really good crowd. Hilary will be very pleased. So on behalf of Qvmag Friends, the committee, I'd like to warmly welcome you all here today to our people, their stories. This is a project that captures the valuable stories of our local people. Thank you for those of you who continually show up to our people, their stories, month after month. We really appreciate your support. And also to any newcomers, particularly some Queensland visitors as well. At the end of the talk, you'll have a little time for questions as well that you can ask Hilary. So save some questions to the end, please. To commence, I'd like to acknowledge country by reading a passage I came across in Hilary, our guest speaker today, her beautiful book, Undersong. Here she captures for us the words of Deborah Birdrose, ethnographer and a long-term friend of the Yarralin people of the Victoria River Country in Northern Territory. These words remind us of what is meant by country. People talk about country in the same way that they would talk about a person. They speak to country, sing to country, visit country, worry about country, feel sorry for country, and long for country. People say that country knows, hears, smells, takes notice, takes care, is sorry or happy. Country is not generalised or undifferentiated type of place, such as one might indicate with terms like spending a day in the country or going up country. Rather, country is a living entity with a yesterday, today and tomorrow, with a consciousness and a will toward life. Because of this richness, country is home and peace, nourishment for the body, mind and spirit, heart ease. It's gorgeous. Oh, beautiful. God. All right. Cape ivy, mirrorbush, sweet pitostrum. Beautiful plants in their own right, but in the wrong place. They compete with and smother our native species. It was tackling these very weeds at the weekly Bicheno Landcare Working Bee that I first met Hilary, to say hello and to see who was winning, the weeds or her. I have a theory that people with a little dirt under their nails will have interesting stories. Not sure how clean your nails are today, Hilary, but I know you'll have some terrific stories. British-born Tasmanian, Hilary Burden is a writer, editor and perfumer. She worked for leading publications in both Sydney and London and is a former ABC radio broadcaster. Her best-selling memoir, A Story of Seven Summers, was published in 2012, and her celebrated follow-up, Undersong, A Tasmanian Journey into Country, in 2023. She served as a judge for the Tasmanian Writers' Prize and for the Walkley Young Journalist of the Year. Most recently, Hilary co-authored Visionary, Gardens and Landscapes for Our Future with the internationally renowned garden photographer Claire Takash. Last year she opened Undersong Perfumery, and this December will launch her third fragrance, inspired by the coastal landscape where she lives. And I asked Hilary, could you please bring some Kunzia over? Because when you think of the East Coast at this time of year, you think of Kunzia. So make sure you come past and have a lovely little sniff of this beautiful Kunzia down the front here. It is with great pleasure that I introduce to you our people, their stories, Hilary Burden, telling our story through fragrance.
Thank you so much, Trish, and thank you so much for coming on a wet Wednesday. I do feel like I'm amongst friends, even though I probably haven't met some of you. I feel like I know you. And I also feel like country's here today with us. It's what brought us here, with that beautiful explanation of how we met and how we brought a bit of the East Coast, where I now base myself, with the kunzia and that beautiful kunzia, that beautiful aroma that you can get. It's sort of honeyed at this time of the year, and it's all floppy along the foreshore walk where we weed. Beautiful walk that you can do along the coast in Vishnu if you're ever there. I just need to do something with this computer. Now, a writer usually likes to write to explain their message, but this is oral history, so I'm respecting the tradition of speaking rather than writing. And it's also something that is really contained in the themes that are in Undersong that have now become a story in fragrance for me. So it might sound odd calling yourself a writer and a perfumer these days. But to me, perfume is a language, and I'm now writing using the language of perfume. And some of the words that are associated with perfume are notes and an organ. So it also has musical resonance in that you're trying to use a language that isn't literary. It's a different way of trying to express what you mean when you can't find the words. And I think as a writer, I kind of felt that I'd run out of words to talk about the relationship I felt I was increasingly experiencing with land or country. Undersong was a word I found in the writings of Robert Macfarlane, who's a bit of a rock guru author in the UK. I've read a few of his books, and I went to see him speak at the Hay-on-Wye Festival, which is the little town in Wales, where once a year it's just inundated with people from all over the world in festival tents that spread from north, south, east, west. People camp and fill up the Airbnbs. I don't know if anyone's been to the Hay-on-Wye Book Festival, but he was in front of an audience like this, multiplied by 5,000 people. And I heard him use the word undersong. And so you can read it there, the subtle underlying sounds of a given landscape, the ambient murmur of a particular place or environment. The undersong is often hard to hear or tune into because it comprises sounds that do not tend to declare themselves actively or ostentatiously to the ear. So, for example, the sound of the wind, distant running water, hum of traffic, compound birdsong. And I'm sure you can think of many others that represent the undersong when we all just stop to listen and tune in to what's outside of us and not in our busy heads sometimes. Right the right way. When I lived in the northern Tasmania, so it's probably about 5 or 6 years ago now that I left this beautiful acreage on a corner of Pipers River Road in Corula, overlooking Mount Arthur, and on the other side of that hill the beautiful towns of or hamlets of Lalla and Lilydale and beyond. And this is where I wrote the story of Seven Summers, which Trish referred to, was published in 2012. When that came out, it's always that thing about what do you write next. And it struck me when I was sitting on my veranda from where this is taken, height of summer with all the daisies, the long grass, and you can see a little bit of the mown track. I used to sort of get on the ride on and feel lazy. Instead of mowing the whole thing, I just thought, I'll see what grows, and I'll walk down the paths, and it'll be nice to walk through that kind of English sense of a meadow that we all love, really. And I guess I looked out over there and I thought, I've written about the history of this house and the feeling of what was inside the walls, and lifted up the carpet and got really connected to that old 1898 house that had been a convent for some of its life and a really happy family home for much of it, with its orchards, its view of Mount Arthur ever present. And I thought, gosh, what was here before? What would have grown here before the house was built, before the valley was settled, before Tasmania was Tasmania? How did the old people live? And how do I find out? And that's kind of where I began to feel that I needed to leave the nun's house, as I called it. Going around the wrong way. And I started learning about how the land was carved up and kind of like imprinted from above, rather than that sense of where's the river, where are the boundaries, what's in the environment that might tell us how this could be divided. It was just simply a plan from a surveyor's office, dictating where often English town names would be: Beaconsfield, Exeter, all towns from my experience in the UK. Had an auntie who lived in Beaconsfield, but it was in Hertfordshire, north of London. So it's that sort of feeling of like, this is my home, but it's reminding me of England. So again, what was here before? And so through my work then at ABC, I was doing a lot for the Rural Hour and the Rural Report, and the Country Hour. And I got to meet lots of local historians and land managers, and made a particular beeline for this place in, it's called Surrey Hills. It's a racecourse plain, and I was taken there. It's actually part of a forestry Tasmania land fenced area. I was taken there by a local historian who had permission from Sustainable Timbers to take people there if they're a particular interest in native grasses in particular. So this would have been all of our paddocks if we had not planted pasture grass, I guess. So this is native grass, and this is famously known for Hellier thinking, and the early settlers in the northwest identifying this as possibly a place for sheep, because it was naturally a plain. It had been land managed by the original people, but it proved to be too cold for agriculture and for sheep management there. So I'm sitting on an old shepherd's hut that had seen better days. And this was what really entranced me, and for me this is kind of like one of the many images I'm obsessed with, which is, for me, that's Undersong. A close-up of where I was sitting, and you just look down and see these amazing everlasting daisies. And I'm like, oh, I only know those from cottage gardens, but they're here in the wild. They're there. And then I started to just see things in a different way, like, wow, just how beautiful Tasmania would be with this other sense of beauty. It's beautiful as it is, but how precious, and yet it's locked up in forestry land, and it's taken by a retired surveyor who has a love to share in small quantities. That's Brian Rollins on the left, the local historian I was talking about from Burnie, and that's me doing a story on some people from TasTAFE, young people who were learning how to be nature guides for tourism purposes. Yeah. Lots of people have been my teachers along this way, because I started from an ignorant position, which is what I don't know. I was trying on a journey to find out. So I kind of went on this organic path. This was about 5 years ago. And this is another story I did on Alex Snepp, who used to live in Launceston with her young children then, and she was specialising in edible, foraging for edible plants, a lot of them on the roadside. So here she is identifying with her children different things. And you can see the young one there, she's smelling it. And it just seemed to be instinctive, because that's how Alex was in her interests. Learnt a lot from Alex. And of course, Auntie Patsy Cameron, who's she's very, very generous with writing the foreword for Undersong, and spending a lot of time on country with me, and with many people who are interested in celebrating country. She's been very generous with her time and energy, and there she is in the centre there showing me kangaroo grass, which is another one of my favourite natives. It's not endemic to Tasmania, but it's at the height of summer. It's kind of, in many places, it's waist high, and we'll come to Glover Country, but I think I saw Carol. Yes. Carol, on her open days, has encouraged the most beautiful patch of kangaroo grass, as well as of course you can see it growing in the wild natively on the hills around Patterdale, just past Eddington. But she's gloriously celebrated Themida triandra in a patch, in a bed actually, just like we would plant beautiful roses. There is kangaroo grass. Again, with Patsy and her husband Graham, we used to go on drives on country, and I called them Sunday drives. And it was just that sense of being relaxed, and you're not actually particularly going anywhere in particular. You just pack I'm sure we all do this. I think we're the demographic. It's not about the destination, it's about how you get there. And just, pack a lunch, pull up along the side of the road, see what you see. There's actually a little wombat in the middle of that, just to the right of the track. It's one of my favourite back roads, and that one's on Flinders Island with the Stackhausia, which little candles at summertime flowering, just stunning, just growing out of the gravel road. And this is one of I started to record the things that were aromatic. That was the thing. I just felt walking on country with Patsy, that sensitivity about you're walking with, you're not walking ahead, you need to follow and respect and not recolonise. And so what I found I was wanting to learn more about was the aromas of these beautiful flowers, because the European in me, I suppose, is trained to, you smell a rose, stop and smell the roses. And here I stopped to smell what Patsy called the sleeping tea tree. And so I've done a lot of recording of the things that are aromatic. And just a bit of gathering on the sides of roads, on back roads, obviously being very careful not to take things that are rare or endemic, or that were in small supply. Or I kind of felt that these were areas that were going to be slashed by the council at some stage. Or they were on private properties where I was seeing friends and they were taking me to show their favourite things on their properties. And then I would go and often press these, and so I've got a herbarium where I've got lots of recorded things of what I found. I don't necessarily focus on the classification or the name. I use the common names for them. It's just a lot to learn. So, and I think I wanted to be focused on what I was feeling from the plants rather than kind of like being linear, being encyclopedic. And this is what I was talking about with Glover Country. I was very fortunate to be the inaugural writer or artist, as it is, in residence at John Glover's beautifully restored house and much loved at Eddington in Mills Plains. And this was taken by my friend Claire Takash, who's an amazing landscape garden photographer. And again, just that sense of walking on lands that haven't seen much action, but a lot of respect and love, and trying to just look at different sorts of grasses and what was growing there, and bending over and smelling and looking for orchids and looking up in the sky for the birds, and just, getting away from busy life and trying to see what the story was It's also where I finished Undersong, which took 10 years to write. I never set out for it to take 10 years. But this is a view looking down from one of the walks you can do on Glover Country. All the lovely prickly box, which is incredibly aromatic, as well as its seeds. So when it's finished flowering, they turn into these little hard seeds, and they're very aromatic in themselves. So nothing is wasted in terms of aroma. Just a beautiful look down into the valley and across to Ben Lomond. Following the kind of ways of the deer, I think, or how people would walk across land. And that's some gatherings of the prickly box and the kangaroo grass and some white gum. And then from Carol's garden, where she's planted the sweet pea. And then that was the first distillation, or first, like, I could want to make a fragrance of this place, saying, like, I wish I could just take this home, and that smell of Glover Country. So I taught myself to steam distill. I actually, at one stage, went back to Glover Country and back to Glover House and had the still in the kitchen there. Distilling everything individually, so you're respecting the nature of the plant, and then blending them to a recipe that I'd learnt through various courses I've done on making perfume in London and France and Sydney, just making a fragrance to a recipe that was determined by me, but that kind of reminded me, I think, of Glover Country. There's Carol in the middle, and two other people who've got an amazing sense of landscape and wild planting plants from nature that grow here in gardens, along with everything else that you might love. But so Catherine Shield, who with Carol did the planning for the Glover Garden, and on the left, and Sally Johansson, who is a rare plant specialist, three beautiful women who I met on this path. I don't see often enough, but I always acknowledge and respect how much they know, and I've learnt a lot from them. Sally particularly taught me about when she was mowing. She has a property at Nika with her husband Andrew Darby, who's a beautiful nature writer, and they do a lot of bushwalking. And she talked about mowing according to the contours of the land, which I found really interesting. And she said to the point where she'd almost let the handles go on the mower and just kind of walk behind it, so that she was following its natural. It's almost like quite sort of like you're stroking someone's body, like the land is the body, and so she's sort of mowing to the way it wants to be mown, not how we tell it, like that surveyor's map. It's a different way of thinking. And Simon Cameron, who has a property called Kingston next door to Glover Country, a whole history in itself. But I've spent some time with him, and he's very assiduously using pesticide to get rid of weeds, and to encourage the things that would grow natively on his massive landscape sized kangaroo grasslands, really. And he has stock there who are just as healthy eating kangaroo grass, he says, as our European pasture grass. And Mark Wopstra, I did a course on the West Tamar on how to identify eucalypts, which I still can't do very well. But the eucalypt was on one of his references, Rob Wiltsh's fabulous series. And that comes everywhere with me often, and you don't ever know a eucalypt at first glance, because there's lots of processes that you have to go through with the seed and the flowering and the nuts and the leaf at different times of the year. So you can't just say, oh, that's blue gum necessarily, just trying to name it at that moment. It's unless you're really, really expert. And then Reese Campbell, who I met again through Brian Rollins. She lives in Wynyard in the northwest. Fabulous woman, author of Eat Wild Tasmania, is that it? Eat Wild Tasmania, and 2 volumes of that incredibly successful book. I highly recommend it, where she grows with her husband Cole. I think when I saw her 3 years ago, there were 136 edible plants, native Tasmanian edible plants, in their suburban garden that they'd loved and nurtured. And you can actually, it's an open garden, so you can actually organise to go and see it. But there we are, back in the Surrey Hills, looking for orchids in November. It's this time of the year, October, November. A lot of the beautiful wild orchids are showing themselves. So I always say British-born, because I think if I wasn't British-born, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing with perfume, because I've had this... I worked in London for magazines for 20 years, and I've had this kind of education in, perfumery, I suppose, that's quite glossy and glamorous. And it's a bit like food. If anyone had read Seven Summers and read the Hill Barn story, that was really an obsession with where our food comes from. And this is an obsession with where what we smell comes from, I suppose. And I realised then that our perfumery is colonised by a European sense of smell and European plants, which are beautiful. And love rose and jasmine and neroli and iris and tuberose and all those beautiful fragrances that go to make up modern perfumery. But I hadn't connected what was in the bottle with the story of perfume and how it was made. Grasse is the centre of modern perfumery. It was a tannery town. It's where it was a leather town. And then in the 17th century, 18th century, Catherine de' Medici and Josephine Bonaparte, the queens of Europe, European famous queens, popularised perfume, and Catherine de' Medici named Grasse as the centre because there was a trend at the time that the aristocracy followed, which was to scent their leather gloves, to take away the smell of the leather, those beautiful long leather gloves in the royal courts, and they would scent them with rose petals, with different flowers. The wooden boxes that they got sent, the gloves got sent in, were layered with rose petals and all sorts of things to take away the smell of the leather. And so with the Queen's auspices, Grasse became a perfume town. And I've probably been about 4 or 5 times now, so whenever I go back to see my family in England, I make a point of going to Grasse. And I love this map, which there's a massive museum called the International Museum of Fragrance in Grasse. It has 2 parts to it. One is in the town, lots of galleries where I saw this map, and one is outside on the outskirts of town, and it's actually a garden where they grow all the aromatic plants that exist. And you can spend a lovely day wandering around this garden at the right time of year. And they are all aromatic plants, so herbs, flowers, just stunningly done, and with lots of interpretation and signage. Delightful time spent there. But this map was just, I loved, because it's the sense of a map of beauty. So you've got the regions of Grasse divided up into what they grow. So you've got the yellow is mimosa, you've got violet, you've got orange, you've got lavender, narcissus, and it goes down to iris. And I just love that layering of that's just a lovely way to look at the land where they're growing plants for beauty. One particular thing that interests me about mimosa is I found out through reading about... we'll talk about vetiver first, as this is the slide. Vetiver was one of my favourite fragrances in London by Jo Malone, it's quite a famous perfume brand, and got bought out by Estee Lauder, and it got even bigger. But vetiver, I didn't even think what it was. And when I went to the museum, they actually had the plant there, and I thought, oh my goodness, vetiver, it's a plant. Not only is it a plant, but actually the piece that's used for perfumery is the roots. And again, that speaks to me of Undersong, that sense of do we even know if any of the roots of our plants have the capacity to give an aroma that can make a perfume like vetiver? And that's vetiver planted in that garden I was talking to you about in the south of France, where all the aromatic plants, it's just been, what's the word? Pruned, thank you, hacked, but yeah, looking very neat. This is London, a perfumer called Lynn Harris, and that's her boutique. Her label is called Perfumer H, and this was about 4 or 5 years ago, and since she only had one boutique or perfumery in Crawford Street in Marylebone in London, she now has them all over the place. Like, it's just become a bit like Jo Malone. So she's had massive support. But what I love about her is it's just, you can see the perfume being blended there. She honours the seasons. Her shopfront window always has the scent of the season. So she had one shopfront window with a bunch of oranges, another one with a vase of pink pepper that had dried. And so it's always about education, of trying to connect the plant with the perfume and the smell with the plant. It's just a lovely cyclical thing. And this is another course I did, a masterclass in blending. This was in Hackney with a French perfumer, and it was called Experimental Perfume Club. And the first thing we had to do was smell 15 different fragrances in the morning and remember them, and then in the afternoon we had to smell 15 more. And then you learn that to be a master perfumer, you have to remember at least 8,000. Seriously. So I thought, I'm too old for that. I'm just going to do what I want to do and just hopefully learn as much to be able to make a perfume that I like. We had to then at the end, the last day of the course was to make a perfume. This was an amazing lesson. The first thing she said, before you do anything, before you even smell or choose an essential oil or the essential oils that are going to make your perfume, you have to think of a story, what you want your perfume to tell in a story. And I thought, that's my profession, that's what I do, that's great. So I wanted to do, obviously, the smell of the bush. And then you choose the fragrances that you like that are divided into top notes, mid notes and base notes. So these are all essential oils that are classic ingredients in French perfumery or modern perfumery. So you can see there I've chosen white moss, cologne, lavender, aniseed, 5 spices, fig, cedar, frankincense and something else, none of which constitute the Australian bush. However, I went away thinking, gosh, that's the story of the Australian bush, because they're the fragrance that I chose and that's how you learn how to make perfume, bizarrely. Nothing to do with the actual, it's about imagining. It's really, the master perfumers I've learned of today are really great novelists. They imagine their fragrance into being, and then it gets marketed, and that's kind of, I've learned to understand marketing is probably bigger than actually making the scent itself in this day and age. Another influence was living on the East Coast, initially in Swansea, where I used to volunteer at the East Coast Heritage Museum, which has a fabulous resource for local history, of which there are several books by Louisa Ann Meredith, including My Home in Tasmania, and her beautifully illustrated Some of My Bush Friends in Tasmania. And I was, if anyone's seen that, it's available in all the libraries, I think, and the East Coast Heritage Museum still sells copies. They republished it beautifully. And you can tell she loves Tasmania, or parts of Tasmania she didn't like, which were a bit contentious. But in terms of how she viewed our wildlife and our plants, she's second to none. While I spent a lot of time while I was in the UK in the London Library just going through the old stacks, just to see, because perfumery is as old as the human story. It goes back to southern Arabia, and the notion of they didn't have sewers, they didn't have air conditioning, they didn't have air fresheners. they actually, every house had a still pretty much. It was very domestic, and so they used what was in their environment to distill and take away the bad smells by using the good smells. So I learnt about that in the London library stacks in these old leather-bound books. And I found another book called The Romance of Nature by Louisa Ann Meredith, and these are paintings, watercolours that she'd done while she was still living in England. And so it was lovely to see that little posy, is that what they're called? Posy? Yeah. Of violets or violas, and yeah, just lily of the valley, and just beautifully depicted. Again, this journey, I went to see some friends who live in central Portugal. They had worked in London, and they just decided, if Tasmania was closer, they would have come and lived in Tasmania. But they went to central Portugal, and just surrounded by olive groves and orange groves. And I was talking about learning how to distill, and they said, "Oh, Hill, there's an old copper factory just up the road that makes stills. Let's go and have a look." So that's the shop front, where I bought my first still and brought it home with me. And as I was leaving, I said, "Where are they made?" Underneath the shop. They took me downstairs into this open plan, like this size of this room, and there are about 12 guys there, craftsmen, just at different stations. You can see he's hammering the copper. It was someone else welding, and it was just an amazing thing to see them being made, and they've been making stills there for 80 years. It's just every Portuguese house has a still for, more for alcohol, I think, in my experience. And then I came back to Swansea, where I was based for 3 years, and the back roads, the back paddocks, and if you look at that and you just go, wow, that's scrub. But again, that thing that if you look closer, there's a whole lot more going on. So lots of orchids, the flag irises, which are just coming into flower now, looking over Great Oyster Bay there. That's where I put my first still. I bought a block with an old caravan on it, so I turned it into a perfumery where I can see us starting to gather quite an archive there, and just all through COVID, that's kind of what I was doing, just seeing which plants showed aromatic qualities, if I could blend them, just playing really. And that was the first one. So that was, I thought, what would the business be called? And because I love kangaroo grass so much, I used the word themida, which I thought was probably a hard word, but it was just the first bottle I did for a friend from the woolly tea tree. Gathering is a lovely process. And often I don't gather, often I just go and take photographs because everything's so beautiful. So this is the Acacia suaveolens, sweet wattle. And I didn't know that there are 11 endemic wattles in Tasmania. Thank you to Margaret, surname's gone, there's a book just called Acacias, that are the wattles of Tasmania. And she's denoted which ones are aromatic. So that was a great resource for me, this Acacias of Tasmania. So suaveolens, and that's Kunzia on the right. And that's Catherine. She has 100 acres down south, and we often go wandering on her property. Well, not often enough, just smelling what's in the air. Cressy Beach. So this is where I found Coria alba, which is actually, another name is Cape Barren tea, which is used in place of black tea, was by the early people, the settlers, the second people, and just pouring hot water on it. And it is incredibly aromatic and beautiful through the still. And that's my back paddock, the white gum. There was one particular one in my paddock which I put the flowers through the still. And Oyster Bay pine, which is another revelation. There are two cypresses endemic in Tasmania, and this is very common on the east coast, and it was a lot more common before, it was used for building with the second people when they used it for houses, and a lot of the old houses are made from Oyster Bay pine. It's fabulous, tall, straight timber. But the actual the needles are beautiful through the still. They have this beautiful as a hydrosol, so that's just the steam distillation as a botanical water, or what you might know as a flower water, floral water. Just beautiful, pungent. And I was living just up the road from Pyrmont, which is a beautiful restaurant and accommodation just south of Swansea on the coast. And a friend of mine was working there as a chef, and he said, why don't you bring your hydrosols down and maybe I could use them in cooking? And I told him about the Oyster Bay pine, and he thought, I'm going to match that with the oysters. So I had a spray bottle, and as they served the oysters, they sprayed the Oyster Bay pine over the top, which was magic. Just a random slide of one of the other places I really love on the East Coast, the Winifred Curtis Reserve, and the story of how that land is preserved and saved is a very female story, and I think that's another aspect of this journey that I've been on with fragrance, is how many women's voices I've recorded in here just through following the path. And I didn't realise Winifred Curtis, the queen of the botanical education in Tasmania, well represented in the bookshops here, and the two women, Geraldine Archer, the doctor, and Mary Curtis, and others who helped save this 80 hectares. And it is the most stunning walk. It's just quite flat, and you end up on a little bit of a rise, and you get that view. I mean, it's not particularly dramatic, but it's just stunning. And that's beautiful Bron, who during COVID, she had planted a rainforest 30 years ago on her property in Underwood, north of Launceston. And I told her, we were talking on the phone, supporting each other, and I said I was distilling. And so she sent me in a shoebox, leatherwood leaves, mountain pepper, sassafras, and celery top pine, all just in tissue paper in a shoebox, and it arrived. I'm like, oh, that's so beautiful. So I distilled each one of them individually and blended it again with that methodology that I'd learned through perfume making, just to a recipe that I thought, do I need more leatherwood? Do I need more mountain pepper? Is that too sassafrasy? And then sent it back to her in a bottle, and I called it the land, because that's what Bron called their property, where she'd planted the rainforest. And then she rang me up and she said, Hill, you can't call it the land, it's too beautiful, you need to call it Gondwana. So that's how Gondwana got its name. So yeah, celebrating the leatherwood, the sassafras, sassafras, the celery top pine, and the mountain pepper leaf. So I used the leaf, which is incredibly peppery. And then I was asked, just how you rub up against people in the community. A friend worked at Spring Bay Mill, and they had some new accommodation they wanted to open, and could I create a scent for the opening of their accommodation? So I had a tour of the Spring Bay Mill with the then head gardener, Marcus Ray. I've got a problem with names today. Anyway, he's a wonderful man, and he took me around, and I said, I don't want to see everything, I just want to see what's aromatic. And he showed me all these little plants that they planted in their landscape renovation, and I thought, I can't pick those, they're just babies. So as I drove out, I saw this amazing Blackwood avenue, and I thought, I don't even know if Blackwood, it's an acacia, I don't even know if it's fragrance. So I went up to it, and of course they have the most amazing fragrance, Blackwood wattle. And then I asked what the main tree was that went through the Triabunna, as it was, mill, and then they said it was blue gum. So I found some flowering blue gum and some young leaves, and also the gum nuts. I distilled them all individually and then blended it to create spring, which is the second scent that I've made. So that's isolating the blackwood blossom and the blue gum. Back to grass. I took Gondwana, so the hydrosol that I'd made for Bron. I thought, right, I'm going back to learn more about... People were saying it was too delicate and they wanted it to smell stronger. So I thought, well, I'll go to a master perfumer. I managed to find one who specialised in natural fragrance, And it happened to be rose celebrating season, and they have these wonderful installations which are so inspiring, and tourists come from all over just to walk through. For orange season, they have oranges festooned like Christmas decorations, like all through the town, and all the shopkeepers get involved in it and everything. So it's a real seasonal celebration. This is my little eyrie in the Grass Institute of Perfumery, over in the hills overlooking the Côte d'Azur, and that's Marianne, and she was, choosing. I'd actually made 6 different place-based scents at this stage, and she chose Gondwana as her favourite to work on, and so that's what we did. And that's me with my certificate at the Grass Institute of Perfumery. And this is one of the things you have to see, the factory. The Fragonard is one of the oldest fragrances in France, and it's in the same family. The 3 sisters run it now, and it's just a beautiful experience. They're very generous in sharing how they make their perfume and the story of Fragonard. And this is a perfumer's organ. So that early reference to music relates to this, how a perfumer will sit. It's not exactly sitting over a beautiful view of the south of France or the east coast of Tasmania. It's better if it's a bit like when you're writing, is to be kind of closed off a bit and to be out away from the sunlight so that the essential oils don't degrade. But this is how you get focused into top, middle and base notes. And then there's another version of it to the right. And this is my version. A bit random, a bit messy, but that's me. Bit of this, a bit of that. Oh, and this is, jumping back to France, this is Josephine Bonaparte's house, Chateau Malmaison, on the outskirts of Paris. I went there, that's her boudoir. But this story of mimosa, which is actually Acacia dealbata, which grows everywhere in Australia, and they use that for mimosa, which is which is one of the main ingredients, like you learn, that's grown in grass. But she was responsible. She's as you can see, she loves beauty. So I was very keen to go and see inside that chateau to see how much she loved beauty, to see if I could find a wattle, but it wasn't. The garden had since been, disintegrated over time and different owners. But she, with all her botanists, were going around, the zoologists were going around the world bringing seeds back and plants and this, that and the other. And she brought the Acacia dealbata seeds back and grew wattle, and that's how it became, it's Australian and it's celebrated in French perfumery, but I can't buy it here. It has to come from Europe, the essential oil. But I do distill it. I do distill Acacia dealbata in small quantities. And then this is another place that I had this... I haven't got time. Shall I just... So I've got 10 minutes. Yes. Right.
Well, no, if people have got a chance for questions.
Yes, so I've got 5 minutes. Thank you. I'm talking too much. I was waiting for a bell. This is just how people appreciate in Europe wild things. This is a factory that's been there for 25 years, and they distill wild plants for natural perfumery. And they go out into the hillsides, and the French can be very protest-driven, I've found, and they're very strong about protecting biodiversity, the right to forage in the wild, because part of it is about looking after them and being educated, and the right to transmit, as in educate. So it's a right to tell people and share, and I just found that very powerful. Met the owner, and a bit more about, just from my museum travels, that's my second still that I work with. The branding aspect is, I hadn't realised, but you obviously need to stand out, and I'm very fortunate to have a graphic designer who lives in Swansea who's worked in London, and he's brilliant. His name's Michael Travaglia, so he did all the branding. And so there's Gondwana. The bottles come from France. It's very old school. That manila label was the sign-off. I had to sign that and send it back. That's me taking Gondwana to Paris. Bit cheeky. That's spring, and then this is my inspiration for the third and probably final fragrance. I wanted to have 3. Is the coast, not necessarily that is of the east coast, but that sense, that smell that you have in Tasmania, that sort of fresh, invigorating, uplifting. So that's the next one. These are my friends. We talked about land care, so I've got a lot of inspiration learning the friends of land care. Working out how to colour, how do I make blue fragrance? That's another story. And then what's flowering now? I just thought I'd finish by sharing some pictures of what's flowering now. So the native clematis, the blue love creeper, which just says to me, survive. It just wants to grow up and wrap itself around you. I just love that. Don't go down, just wrap yourself around something. And then the white forget-me-not, which is a bit of a revelation for me. It has the most, it's native, it's endemic, has the most powerful fragrance, and yet it's this tiny, tiny flower plant, and it smells like lily of the valley. Stories told in both my books, and obviously thank you to everyone and everything you come in contact with, tangible and intangible, known and unknown. Much appreciated that you came out on a wet Wednesday, and so if you have any questions from this ramble...
Why only 3 perfumes?
Because it's hard work. That's taken me... from Go Get, which you've seen today, that's like 5 years. From Gondwana to now, so in actual the eau de parfum perfume, that's taken nearly 2 years. And so, it's a long process and and I just kind of want to sit back and enjoy them, other people enjoying them, rather than being driven to the next one. Yeah.
Have you got any preservatives in your hydrosols?
I don't, and I do. So I started using Euxyl, EUXYL, just a tiny, it's like 2%. It's a preservative that I was told is the best from a perfumer that I work with in Sydney called Josephine Fullerton. But then I kind of thought, I've got everything stored. I keep things refrigerated, and I only do what I need. So, and I've been working with the ones that I work with for such a long time now. I know if they've gone off. And they seem to all have quite a life, though. And what I do is I filter them. So I filter them through a coffee filter. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Have you found any native orchids useful in your work?
I've seen a fragrant orchid in the Campbelltown Cemetery. And I think it doesn't come up every year. And... they struggle protecting it because they have different people mowing, and they have a different view of mowing, and sometimes it gets mown and sometimes it gets saved and the boundary gets put out. But no, I think they're too precious, is my answer for now. Yes. Yeah.
And where do you purchase your perfume?
So I have online and in Launceston at Design Tasmania, and in Bicheno at the Little Bay Collective, which is a patisserie and design store. I did have a little perfumery, which I've moved out of, and I might be looking for another one, but I'm not sure. I quite like being able to not be in one place. I need to be exploring the land more, yeah. But yes, Design Tasmania and online, yeah.
Where do you source your ingredients?
The essential oils?
That question because it was very quiet at the front.
Yes. Sorry, Belinda.
Could
Yeah.
you just repeat it for the people at the back to know what the question was?
Yes. The question was, how do I source my ingredients? Where? Different suppliers. And that's another thing that you have to learn too, is there are, like in anything, unreputable suppliers, which I wasn't aware of. You think I'll get some mimosa, but they're not all of the same quality. So it's a good idea to establish relationships with people who've been working with those products for longer than you, to get those recommendations. Yeah. So lots of different suppliers all over the world. Yeah.
I suppose I had an agenda with that question, to tell people to discourage aromatic foraging.
Oh, I see. So I use essential oils, and I forage for plants for distillation. I'm very careful about where I forage. I'm obviously very local, and I know the patches where I go. It's not about smash and grab. It can't be, because it's about caring for the plant and telling the plant's story. If I was just selling perfume on a shelf, I wouldn't feel comfortable about that. This opportunity to be able to tell and share the story of our plants is part of my motivation. It's not about picking plants just to put them in a vase. Yeah. Mm.
Hilary, I believe there.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Yes.
I believe there are legal questions about owning stills. Can you explain that a little bit?
What do you know?
My understanding is that it's illegal to own a still for.
I think for
alcohol.
I only use water, spring water. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So it's actually fine to use a still for water. And I would never. Some people do mix. There's a course you can do in New Zealand on distillation. She's very good educator. She's in Waiheke Island, and she's a international guru. She's been doing it for 30 years, and she distills for gin and alcohol, and also for natural perfume and cosmetics. Jill Mulvaney, and she does a lot of blends with her distillations. But everyone, it's like a relationship. Everyone's different with their still. It's like any craft. It's your relationship with that tool and how you've used it over time. Some people call them names. But I just use spring water and one plant, and I only have water in the pot. Some people put other things in the pot to distill with the vegetation in the column, but no, mine's just the plant. It's about the spirit of that plant. Yeah.
Last one?
Yeah, I was just curious if when you were making these perfumes you were thinking about the kind of person who might purchase them, given that perfume is considered a luxury item, and I guess, it's not as prevalent. Perfume wearing is not as prevalent as it used to be.
Yeah. They are a luxury product, so they are, like, the 50ml bottle is expensive, and it's got to be because of honouring the plant and the time that it takes. Like, it takes nearly a year. It took me nearly a year to make Gondwana. It's taken a year to research the third one, the coastal one. And so, and the ingredients, the essential oils, are really expensive, and I don't mind so much about the time, because it's how I live my life. I don't really put a dollar value on how I live my life, which drives anyone talking about unit costs mad, because it's got to all be counted in there. It's like writing. So they are expensive, but hopefully I do small 2ml vials, and I've had a lot of sales with young people who are smelling their very first perfume, and I have such joy in that. So they're very accessible. Then a 7.5ml spray, and then the 50ml is like top shelf. So, and I don't apologise for that, because they should be. Yeah.
Well done.
I feel I've come a very long way from my grandma, who didn't like perfume because she said it was one smell covering another.
Was she your connoisseur memory?
No. No. I have learnt so much this morning, and I imagine you have too. I hadn't ever thought of a language that wasn't words, I know there are musical languages and so on, but not one involving perfume and smells. So it's opened up a whole new world for me to think of. I love being told to tune in, to listen, and to smell. Because we're so busy rushing about, we don't necessarily do that. I do agree that we've imposed artificial boundaries. I happen to live in Hillside Crescent, and if you know Hillside Crescent, one down the bottom there is Canning Street, and then Canning Street's divided, and it's again up the hill, and that's because they drew the map in London without any topography. So you can't actually go all the way up Canning Street because it breaks in the middle. It's amazing, really, isn't it? It's also a new concept to focus on the feeling that you get from plants. I think I've been focusing on the vision that you get, but not necessarily interpreting that internally as a feeling. So that's a new learning for me. And all of you mowers with ride-on mowers or push ones have to learn to follow the contours. 136 edible Tasmanian plants in one garden. Who knew, other than people who've lived on this land for millennia, that we had as many as 136 edible plants? I love that Grassy originally started out as a place that made leather, because the tanning processes use lovely things like urine and dung. So I can understand why they didn't really like the smell of that, and why, therefore, perfume was the response. Who could learn 8,000 aromas, individual ones, and then how you would mix them together? Gee whiz, it's just amazing. Because what you're trying to do is tell the story of the perfume. Oh gosh. And to do that, you have to imagine the fragrance into being. It's just absolutely amazing, isn't it? How much we have learned this morning about an area that we probably had never encountered before. Please join with me in thanking our wonderful speaker.